So this is Klaipeda, Lithuania, connecting to Brooklyn in New York, and then we have our audience joining in from everywhere. So the world is truly global these days, and we are excited to do these webinars where we can actually join our alumni anywhere in the world, and share the goodness that they have to offer, share their expertise, their insights, and maybe let's start with just kind of the few general slides about LCC, just kind of to give the background and the framework of who is behind these webinars. Or so it is my pleasure to introduce briefly to you LCC International University. The university is the only North American style university in the heart of Europe, which is Lithuania. So Lithuania is the geographic heart of Europe. And LCC International University is starting its 30th year this year. So we are very excited to boast now in our, even though young heritage, but being a very unique liberal arts educational institution in Lithuania, we are excited that we are this North American bubble where we offer the North American style of education, which is also very international. We have students coming to LCC from more than 50 countries around the globe. As a university, we're based on Christian values and worldview, and that makes that affects the community that we all live in, as students find a very safe place to grow and develop and get the education that is accredited in the European Union and is recognized worldwide. And we will touch on that today as we will be talking with our alum who lives and works in the US. And as a university, we are very relational. Again, hopefully that will be reflected in our conversation today, since as an institution, we do want to keep close connections with our alumni, with our students, with our current and former faculty and staff, because we all continuously learn from each other and we grow and develop together. As a university, we offer BA and MA degree programs. On your screen, you can see, you could see our BA programs, mostly in humanity and social sciences. Being a liberal arts university, we offer broad-based education. And then the first year, students study general courses, and then they choose their major. And at the MA level, we have 2 programs designed for working individuals who can combine their careers and further study. But today it's all about looking at the LCC product, so to say. We are starting a series of webinars, which will be done now every other Monday. So once in 2 weeks, you will have a chance to meet and learn from our alumni. Our goal with these webinars is not only to show the success that our alumni have succeed in whatever ways they chose to use their talents and engage in the communities where they live. But we also want to make sure that the alumni have the floor to share their expertise with future students, with current students. So as you were registering for the webinar today, you saw that the theme today was why anti-racism and anti-oppression matter. And that will be the theme of our today's webinar, as our alumna, Jolita Crosland, the class of 2006, will be sharing from her experience. So welcome, Jolita, all the way from Brooklyn, as we mentioned earlier. And before I introduce Jolita and what she does these days, or before she talks about it more, I actually want to show a short clip from an old LCC promotional video. And that was in the days when Jolita was a student at LCC and had just graduated, I believe. So I'll ask my colleague Vidmente to put that short video clip on, and that will give a good tone for our starting discussion.
LCC International University is a learning community that does more than educate students. It transforms the lives of everyone involved.
I mean, I know it sounds really, transforming lives, but this is what happened to me. But the example that's shown here is marvelous. And you want to follow those people, even if you don't believe in God.
There is no really other place.
Thank you. So, Jolita, this is the floor for you. Maybe briefly tell us about what you do, just your title instead of me telling this, what you do today, and how have you moved from the day that was just reflected in the video? How has that transformation from the student years, where has it led you, and what you do now?
Thank you so much, Aista, and thank you for this refreshing memory of my change or evolution of style. Let's just call it this way. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening. It is a morning here in Brooklyn. My name is Jolita, she, her, hers pronouns. And currently I am an executive, I don't even ever use my title, so that's why I messed up, but executive project manager at a consultancy company here in New York called Yancey Consulting. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I do and who we are and why this company is so important in my development. But just a little bit briefly about me. I am originally from Klaipeda. That there is my heart, not only geographic heart, that's where my heart stays and lives. I've been in New York 8 to 10 years now. For the past 8 years, I've been living in Brooklyn with my family. I married an American man, and here you go, love immigrant, and so thus I ended up in Brooklyn. I love living in Brooklyn in New York City, and I love the work that I do. And my my journey to my current position was, a long one. I came here as an immigrant, did random kind of jobs, was a waitress, then worked in corporate world, really toxic work climate. And so I was really happy to move to somewhere where the work that we do is meaningful and actually seeks to bring meaningful change. And in that sense, I think it's very similar to LCC, where it creates this environment where you said a safe place to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that is exactly how I feel about my workplace now. And it's exactly the work that we strive to do. And when you said safe, it made me think, and I'll pause in a moment, but it made me think, we talk a lot about in our facilitations with client partners about psychological safety. And it made me think, so it's not, discomfort is good. Discomfort is something that brings us forward, that lets us grow. Let's think about when we exercise, right? Like when we exercise and we soar, we need to break something to get stronger, right? So discomfort is good. But what we want to create fundamentally is psychological safety, where people feel like there's not going to be a negative consequence at the end of their behavior. And that, when you said that, I was like, yes, that's exactly what LCC was, and I hope continues to be for students. And I'm glad that I'm back in an environment at my current company where psychological safety is actively and intentionally stewarded.
Mm-hmm.
And as you can see, I'm a talker. So
yes, and this is what we enjoy, and this is where we always say, well, LCC alumni get through this, educational process where critical thinking is always emphasized. And then this is where we always say, well, we raise our students and then they never stay quiet. So this is very true of the alumni, of having, meaningful things to say. And this is where we are looking forward to learn from you today. Jolita, in the video, while being a student, I mean, you studied at LCC 2002, 2006. So you did your BA in business. And in the video, and in general, as much as I know you, you've always talked about LCC being these transformative years for you and for then what, where that led you in the future. How would you define that transformation, and where was LCC the most transformative in your life path?
Thank you. Critical thinking is the top. If I had to create some kind of priority in my learnings and what I received from LCC, critical thinking, I believe critical thinking, the whole concept was introduced to me at LCC. I've never, I don't recall at school ever being challenged, right? We were being taught one way. We were never taught to ask questions, right? Especially like I recall history questions, history classes, like so many, like the way history is told, right? We're going to talk about oppression and racism, but the victors tell the story, and the victors are white people, right? And so it's very much tinted, it's very much biased. We were never, like, I don't recall at school ever being challenged to be a critical thinker, and at LCC that was the core. That to me was the core, and I'm so grateful for opening my eyes and my brain, because questioning is a learned behavior. You learn it.
Right.
Like, yes, there might be some people who are super duper talented and born geniuses, right? But for most of us, including me, it's a learned behavior. You have to intentionally work towards it. So I'd say critical thinking.
Right. And then that's very much true. And I think like you were also very much engaged everywhere at LCC, like you were active, and then I mean, everyone remembers you as a student and then remembers you also as an instructor, because I mean, you were a Fulbright scholar in 2008. So after LCC, right, that was I mean, you came back to LCC after your Fulbright studies in New York, and you were teaching media studies to our own students. Tell us, I mean, to jump, from LCC, BA education, and to go study in the US, you studied at New School University in New York. We do get a lot of students asking questions about validity of LCC diploma, right? I mean, we keep saying that it's valid in the European Union. We also get students from the US coming to study at LCC. What has been your experience and also the preparation level when you went on to further studies in the US after LCC?
I always felt like I was, well, let me rephrase. I never felt any kind of way of coming from a small country, which I did, right? I came to a city that's, from 8 to 12 million people, and that's where I came to study. I always felt like I brought good academic background with me. I never experienced any kind of inferiority or any kind of questioning. I was there, thus I was worth of it, right? That I had made it, that was my journey, that was the result of my work. So I never felt really that, I never questioned, to tell you the truth, LCC diploma's validity or its merit as a stepping stone, right, in my journey. Like, I always felt like this was so meaningful to me personally, which is the most important thing, right? And like academically, it was so rich for me. So I never actually felt any kind of way or any kind of inferior kind of feeling about that. The transition was easy. I mean, easy. I don't even like, I had never thought about it. So when you ask this, it's like, I don't think I ever.
Yeah, it kind of becomes natural, but just for,
it became absolutely natural. I think what LCC gave me in a smaller school, because it is a small school setting, was so much valuable. My master's was in a big school. There's a different dynamic to graduate studies, I find, because people are more mature and people already have their social networks and often have their professional networks. So it's a different dynamic of like coming up to age in a graduate school. Then but I always felt very comfortable and proud. And I never gave it a thought as like, oh, what if, because I too was like, I was a good student at school, right? Like at high school. So I was like, oh, study law, study economics, right? Like it was the beginning. Oh, maybe we should go study abroad or something like that. And, life played out its cards, and I stayed in LCC, and it was the best thing.
Thank you. Okay, so then tell us about Jolita of today. So as you briefly mentioned at the beginning, you are now the executive projects manager at the Yancey Consulting firm. And in the description, you very much emphasized that this is a Black-owned organization that works with projects that impact marginalized communities. And because of that, I mean, the topic of today was very much reflecting the essence of your work and what you do. So tell us why what you do, and then why the theme for today and what our audiences should know, because anti-racism and anti-oppression are big themes. And of course, they mean also very different things in different parts of the world. But because the world is so global, and because LCC is so global, and we have students and alumni, you know, coming from all over the world, like I was truly excited in your experience and in these themes and in learning from you and in giving our audience the expertise that you have and the insights that you would like to share with them.
Yes, thank you. So I work at Yancey Consulting, and Yancey Consulting is a small boutique consultancy company. When I say boutique, there's a team of 7 fabulous women. It's all women and it's Black owned. It is all gorgeous all around. So we work primarily in arts and culture, social justice, economic justice, climate justice, media justice spheres, and we primarily work with nonprofits who work in those sectors. And so we are very, very, as an organization, very conscious and very intentional about our work and who we choose to. So we choose to work, we call our clients client partners, because our approach is always collaborative. It's never a top down, here we are the consultants, we're going to come and tell you what to do. The knowledge already lives in the DNA of all of us. Our job is to facilitate, to extract it, and together to ideate and bring it to whatever it needs to be. But so working in with those organizations, usually nonprofits, we really strive for particular impact, and we want to make sure that when we work with projects or organizations that directly impact historically disadvantaged and disenfranchised communities. So we are seeking to elevate their voice, just to amplify their voices and their stories. We want to make sure that we always address systems, because symptoms is what we can work on symptoms, right? But we really want to get to the root causes. So we want to address systems. We're looking for financial thrivability factors for the communities that have been historically disfranchised. And we also look at the environment. So environment, the climate environment, but also the social environment of how people are, where are, and that's where like oppression comes in, and racism. So that's what I do. So I am an executive project manager. That means that I do, well, you name it, right? So I can be from, scheduling the call to leading the meetings and then drafting final strategic plans or stuff like that. So we do a lot of strategic planning work with organizations. We also do a lot of anti-racism, anti-oppression work. And I'll talk a little bit, because there has been a progression, especially what we've seen last year with mass protests and really just I don't even the protest, but like really movement for justice, for real transformational justice. So that has shifted that field a lot, and we get a lot of anti-oppression, anti-racism inquiries right now, because really people want to move from words to actions, and we as primarily white people don't know how to do that. So we do a lot of that work. Now, a little bit on a personal side. So I am married to an American man. He is Black, and so we've been married for 8 years. And when we got married, up until I think I started my work, which is my 5th year now at Yancey Consulting, I don't think, honestly, I mean, it's always a learning journey. It's a lifelong learning journey to know what it is. But I didn't know what racism is or what race dynamics were in the United States. It is, as an immigrant, I knew what well, they're racist, right? I don't think I even knew that race is actually an artificially constructed concept. 16th century or so, right? Like there was no race before that. There were other differentiate. There was always the other, right? But it was on a different basis. It wasn't, whiteness wasn't elevated. It is constructed artificially. Like I didn't know that, right? Like I didn't know the history. I thought like, okay, well, slavery is done, right? Like we good, right? We are not good. It is pervasive. It is still exists in one form and different. And so these intricacies started to open up in my relationship as being in a biracial relationship, and it is very real. Like these conversations in my family are very real and very serious, and both, like I'm getting checked all the time, and I have to work on my fragility. White fragility is a term, right, where white people feel very uncomfortable or like break into tears or like just like, oh, the discomfort. I can't talk about stuff that is uncomfortable to me, right? So I talk about white people, including myself, right? I know I'm part of the problem. And I also know that I need to change my ways, and I can't be fragile, and I need to talk about it and push the narrative and the work forward, because this is the work for us. And so when I say us, I do consider myself as a global citizen, right? I live in the States, and I understand that these racial realities are closer to me. They're literally right in my bedroom, right? But also thinking about oppression overall. Like I said, oppression exists everywhere, right? And it might look differently, but to tell you the truth, often it does look white, right? Like just because if you go back to history and you go back, or like, oh, who discovered, who oppressed, who colonialized, right? We go back to white. And that I'm going to talk about white supremacy a little bit later. And like, so like, these are all things that like have become so part of my thinking and vocabulary that I don't think of them as shocking, but I understand that if people are being introduced for the first time, it might be like, what do you mean I'm racist? Because I can tell you that I'm racist. And race is not as I'm a bad person, I'm consciously racist. No, but I've been socialized. We are global citizens. And even though in Lithuania, we have it's a pretty homogeneous society, like we have TV, we have internet, right? Like we see it. Like my husband can be called names, in my backyard at my parents in Klaipeda, right? And that's not necessarily that the 6-year-old kid is racist, but has been socialized to believe something. So with that notion, I understand that I am racist, and thus I need to check and be conscious about my unconscious biases all the time, right? So I even forgot the question, but I'm just saying.
It's good. This is where the intro into your main theme. Wonderful.
Yes. So, but basically, yeah, and this is how I ended up my 5th year at Yancey Consulting, really an organization that is my LCC number 2, to tell you the truth. Like this creates this environment of growth and questioning and critical thinking, and then moving the narrative and just moving towards a more just society, or societies in plurality. Because again, when you say one society, it means like this takes precedent over, right? Like different societies with different cultures, with different beliefs and different values. I'm gonna pause.
To me, like, I mean, it's very interesting how you present yourself by even saying that you are racist, because I think to certain people, I mean, it takes a pause to even think about it without even knowing what the position is. And as you say, some people, I mean, in certain societies, we don't even think about it. It is kind of inborn with us because nobody even talks about it. And with that, I just want to encourage our audience that if you have questions while Jolita will be sharing, please feel free to type the questions in the Q&A box if you are watching it on Zoom. If you are live with us on Facebook, please make a comment. There are many comments already there sending greetings and enjoying the topic. So we do see the comments, we read them, and so please continue commenting. Or if there will be a question, we'll for sure give that question to Jolita. So yeah, Jolita, you got your break, so now the floor is again yours.
Thank you. And I want to encourage everyone. So when we start when I start the meetings that I facilitate, and it's part of my organization's culture, we always establish communal agreements. And we establish communal agreements to create a psychologically safe space that we spoke about earlier. But we always say it out loud, and we want people to read it and buy into it. But one of the agreements is always interrogate everything. Another agreement is value multiple truths. And another agreement is we care for each other. We are work in process as we struggle or find our ways and our language through this journey, because it is a lifelong journey, I believe, of white people to understand the oppression that we have caused and to remedy it. And when I say remedy, not to mitigate the symptoms, but to fundamentally change the system. So there is equity. And we're going to talk about equity in a moment. And why I bring those communal agreements, I bring them because all the people that I do not see here, but I know that you're there on the other end, question, interrogate me. I welcome, knowing that we're all work in progress. We need to give each other grace to discover the topic and to learn as we go. So yes, any questions, any yays, any nays, any what the hell is she talking about? I want to say that I welcome everything to have a dialogue. Awesome.
And I'll jump in on that thought, because we have one comment from one of our current students who just says, I just want to thank you to speak on this topic. Every type of discrimination is bad, including racism. So you are being heard and the comments are there. So and I will be passing those when I can.
Yeah. I had a quote in mind, but yes, but to that point, like no one wants to be oppressed. No one wants to be oppressed. And being Lithuanian and historically as a country experiencing so many oppressions from different countries over the years, like that resonates to me. So when I need to talk to my dad, who's 60 something and does not necessarily grasp the intricacies of racism in the United States, so he will not be able to tell you what I do, nor my mom. They're like, not exactly sure what she does. She works in consultancy something. But yeah, so I bring the parallels and the analogies from our Lithuanian experience in the Soviet Union oppression, which I think helps ground people to your point that oppression, and to the point whoever shared that oppression exists across cultures and across countries. Yes, okay. I had my notes already, and now I always improvise on the spot. But I do want to, it is important always to have a shared understanding of definitions. Like you said, because some people we think differently. Our lived experience inform our definitions differently. So I really want to bring in the white supremacy that I spoke about so much right now. And really, when we talk about white supremacy, we talk about the assumed superiority of people that are white or perceived as white, right? So you don't necessarily have to be white. All you need to be is perceived as white, and you walk into the store and most likely no one is gonna tail you, right? Because you're considered white. And I brought this book, which I highly recommend. It's a caveat. So this is Robin DiAngelo, White Fragility. Really great book as a sort of like base understanding. It is not be it all. It focuses a little bit too much on white fragility. Like we need to actually do the work instead of just be like, oh, okay, we can. Anyway, I have good book, but read it with the salt of grain, the critical thinking that we've been talking about. But this scholar, Robin DiAngelo, says, whiteness rests upon foundational premise. The definition of whites as the norm or the standard for human. The definition of whites as the norm or standard for human. And then Black, Indigenous, and people of color as a deviation from the norm. So we can expand that thinking of whiteness, but what else we hold as the norm? Let's think about dance, right? Do we think ballet is the classical norm? Like that's what we see on stage. That is the most amazing art form. Like how do we think about the same of, let's say, Afro-Haitian dance? We don't even know it, right? We don't even know it. In fact, in school in Klaipeda, when in my geography class, we studied all capitals of the world, with the exception that Africa was left as a continent, right? Like, I don't think we studied much about the Mayans, the Aztecs, not so much. We did study modern US history, right? We studied a lot, but like some regions are just like
left behind. Yes,
there's just like I never learned the capitals of African countries. It was like this continent. But anyways, what do we hold to be important, right? What do we hold? Like, what do we learn? Like, what do we prioritize? And often in our world, when you think about it, whiteness is the norm, right? Even in communities of color, there is colorism, right? There's always the spectrum. Colorism is where a lighter skin is prioritized or appreciated more than a darker skin, right? So there's always these hierarchies created. But I really appreciated how Robin DiAngelo said, like, really, the norm is this, there's hierarchy created. And talking about oppression, like, yes, I do focus on in our work on race, because in the United States, this is the essence, this is the beginning. Ever since slavery, this country, United States, has been built on the backs of Black people, on slavery, and that has, it's not being talked about. We're not talking about reparations. We're not even acknowledging the real history, because history that's being taught in schools even here is different, right? It's whitewashed, because the victors write the history and we are the victors now. So, but anyway, so when we talk about white supremacy, it's just one of the oppression systems, right? There are other oppressive systems. We talk about racism, right? We talk about sexism. We talk about ableism. We talk about classism, ageism, gender binarism, right? Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, like patriarchy. There are all these systems that when we critically think about it, there's oppression in there towards someone, because it is stating that something is the norm. It is stating that the man, right, that the man can do these things, and the man grants the rights to the woman, suffrage, right? And then we still have to break all these ceilings, right? We talk about ableism, how people that have disabilities have completely different experiences, right? So we're going to talk, I'm going to bring in accessibility later. When we talk about accessibility, what do we mean, right? So fundamentally, we want to make sure that every person can thrive. Every person should be able to thrive, right? And this is not the case. And that's why this work is so important. Because why am I here living in my privilege, and my husband outside cannot get a cab because he's a Black man? This was before Uber. Now, now Uber can still deny, but right? Like, so this is just, this unfairness is staggering, and to me, it's soul crushing. And I think not to me, I think to everyone. And that's why it's so important to talk about this stuff. And not even the States, right? Let's talk oppression about anywhere else. Let's talk about anti-Blackness as a sentiment in general. Exists all over the world. And with the protests, like I even saw there were protests in Lithuania. Mm-hmm. Together standing with George Floyd. And I also saw comments where people were like, this is not our fight, right? But is it really not our fight? Like, what are we being complicit? Are we being complicit if we don't do anything about it? Or if I talk to you, Aista, and to everyone else, like, is that enough? Is it part of it, right? So I really encourage everyone to explore our responsibility as white people in this system, in this world, in this system, right? It's just, yeah. So anyway, so anti-oppression, I want to give some more definitions to the point that I think it's important to hold shared understanding, at least for our conversation. So anti-oppression is, we hold it at our organization as a verb, right? So it's a concept, but it's a livable concept, right? It's the work of actively challenging and removing oppression perpetuated by power inequities in society, right? So you are actively challenging all the time. And that's why critical thinking is so important. Every commercial that I look like is like, oh, yo, so white supremacy right here, right? And there are different articles, and I can definitely share some resources for those who are interested. But one of the articles that I read recently actually outlined the characteristics of white supremacy. And so I'm going to read them, but it's like, I just want you to encourage to think about, like, how do you, like, what's your reaction? What does your body feel when you hear it, right? Like, is there, what comes up? Because to me, it was very interesting to read it. So some of the characteristics of white supremacy: perfectionism, sense of urgency, quantity over quality, worship of the written word, either or thinking, right? So yes or no, nothing in between. Power hoarding, not sharing power. Individualism, right to comfort, It's like, what do you mean I'm going to be not comfortable, right? Yeah, these are some that I had noted. But like for me, when I first encountered that, I was like, what do you mean, like perfectionism? I mean, isn't that good? Right? Like, and it's not you know what, even it's not a good or bad. I don't, right? Like the good or bad is also this dichotomy that's white supremacy, right? Is someone's belief that this is the way to go, but for some reason someone's belief is blanketed over a group of different cultures, right? That different cultures interact in different ways, and now we're saying this is the way to go, right? We're saying, yes, the sense of urgency. Like, I have to say, Europe is a little different with work culture. What I've noticed in United States, it is so, the antithesis of generative is just, it drains you. There's so much expectation of output, right? There's output, efficiency, right? I have friends who are sending emails at 11 p.m., right? Not because they're working, because they're scheduled to send the meeting at 11 p.m. because it shows then that they work the like they're dedicated to the work, right? I mean, it's just insane. Like it's the opposite of freedom. That's the last conversation that I had with my husband. It's like, we talk about freedom. The freedom is to do your work, to have enough money to thrive. Like, the work part is not your life, right? Like, that's the work life. Yes. And I have a job that I love, and it really like I feel like it channels my purpose and it gives meaning to my life. Yet I still have a family that I want to enjoy, right? I still want to travel. I still want to like do all these different things, go dance after school and whatever. And so when I read the white supremacy characteristics, really my initial reaction was like, oh, I don't get it. This sounds very normal to me, right? And every time it brings my understanding, like, okay, I need to challenge. Where did this come from? And I recently, as a Lithuanian, started thinking about like, what were our values as Baltic people, right? Like, what were our values before we were colonized by different forces, right? Like, so I started thinking about like the past and like really getting to the roots and like, is this my culture, right? And if this is my culture, that's fine, as long as I'm not forcing this culture as a system on everybody to prop myself up. And another article that I actually printed yesterday, and I want to recommend for everyone if you haven't read it. So it's written by Peggy McIntosh in 1989, and is still relevant, which shows how slow this progress is. And it's called White Privilege: Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. And so this scholar basically names 26 privileges, and privilege is an unearned advantage of some sort, right? Like, you did not earn it. And so she names like 26 different privileges that she can name off the bat as a white woman. And it's so eye-opening. And again, this was written so long ago, and it still resonates. And it's just it's still the work, and it's still the work, and it's our work. It's, when I say white people, it's our work. That I can't go to my husband and be like, hey, so how do you think I should be an anti-racist, right? So as anti-oppression is an active act of dismantling the reasons and the symptoms of the power disbalance, anti-racist is an active process of checking yourself and others on assumptions and behaviors that are racist, right? So it's not enough to say, oh, I'm not racist, right? That's not what anti-racist. Anti-racist is actually a person who is consciously, intentionally questioning and amplifying the anti-racist and anti-oppression thinking and reasoning. So let's say I'm just gonna read a couple because they're eye-opening to me. If I can, no, I'm lying. I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. So true. If I need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area which I can afford and in which I want to live. I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in such location will be neutral and pleasant to me, right? Like, so I read all this, I'm like, oh yeah, that's my privilege. So it made like, yes, this is my privilege because other people around the world do not have that. They do not have that. They do not have that psychological safety that we talk about. They don't have that. So, and so what else do you need, right? Like, okay, this is like, what can I do? Like, this is my life's work. Like, what do I do? So, okay, anti-oppression, anti-racism. Okay, I spoke about that. Oh, okay. So I want to bring in a quote that I really love. I'm going to share that, and then I'm going to talk briefly about diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, and then I'm going to pause. Does that sound good?
Sounds good. We have questions coming, so.
Okay. So okay. So this is Lila Watson. She's a native artist and thinker here in the United States. And she says, if you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound with mine, then let's work together. So if you just want to help, if my intent is just to help the other, right, which is a term that I don't even want to, we'll talk about it when we talk about inclusion. But like, if I want to help myself, basically, I can just stay home, right? But the understanding is that all our liberation is bound together. We're bound. I'm in Brooklyn. I stay. You're sitting, in, I don't know where, probably Klaipeda, because you have this beautiful background, right?
Yeah.
Like, but we're bound by our experience. We're bound by our humanity, right? Like, we're bound by creating a future for 7 generations forward, right? The 7-generation principle. Like, what are we building today that 7 generations in the future are gonna be living in? And so, okay. So I really love that quote, and we often use that quote in our work as well, because our work is about people, bringing people together and not separating people, right? But at the same time, I do want to say, and this is a little like even a different topic, I'm not going to go into it, but when we say bring people together, yes, we're bringing people together through our work, but we want to bring in people acknowledging their experiences, their lived experiences. So a thing like, oh, I'm not racist, I don't see color. All people are people to me. Yes, all people are people. But when you say that you don't see color, you're basically saying, I don't see you, because I don't acknowledge, I don't know, or I don't acknowledge your experiences, right? Like, I don't know your realities, nor do I want to know, because all I see just people. So I do see people, I love people, but I also see their experiences, and that's where equity comes in. And we can talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And it's an interesting, so, there's evolution of terms. So the first, probably last year, before the pandemic, everyone was talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and access as work, right? We need to do these things. We need to be more diverse. We need to be more inclusive. We need to elevate equity. Now everyone is talking about anti-racism and anti-oppression as a broader umbrella under which diversity, equity, inclusion, and access live as tools or strategies. Right? So it's not enough to do these things. There are other things you basically need when you talk about being anti-oppressive and anti-racist. You talk about embedding those values into all of your decisions as a person, right? As a person, but also as an institution or as an organization. And fundamentally, this work, this anti-racism and anti-oppression work, is people work first. It's our work as people, as humans. And at my organization, Yancey Consulting, we actually use a methodology that we developed. So we call it learn to apply practice. Very important. What we know in our head does not mean it's going to translate into practice, right? But learning to apply practice. And we follow the continuum of head, heart, being. We believe at our organization that we as human beings have the empathy for each other already. Right? Like, we were able to empathize with our grandma or our neighbor, right? Like, so we just maybe haven't walked in other shoes. But once we walk in other shoes, So we understand what we need to do, we feel it, and once we feel it, we can put it into the being, into the practice, into our habits, into our everyday life. And again, this is not training. Like, we never talk about any kind of training, diversity training, anti-racism training, right? These are the terms that people usually, the vocabulary that people usually use. And so we're very mindful that training is, I think about athletes when I think about training, right? I think about people who dedicate every single day to a craft. And I say, if I can bring in your family, I know your daughter is a player, is an athlete, right? It is training day to day for years. The agility that goes into training, that's training. When organizations come to us and say, hey, can you do anti-racism training? We would like a 6-hour or a 4-hour seminar. Mm-hmm. No. Fine. If you want to do that, that's great. Every action is good, right? Moving you towards some kind of more mindfulness, but we're just not the right partner, right? We believe that this is a lifelong journey, and this is a very uncomfortable journey, and you have to take it first and then bring it to your organization. Right. So it's not training, it's conversations, and it's mindfulness, it's learning to apply practice, but let's not call it training unless we're dedicating 8 days every day to work on it. Okay, so diversity, equity, inclusion. So I want to kind of introduce fundamentally those concepts because they can be confusing sometimes. So when we talk about diversity, we talk about bringing in more voices, more people, more perspectives, right? So we're talking about, like, okay, so if we're only white, able, heteronormative, let's say, let's bring in other diverse perspectives into our mix, right? It can be my personal life, right? Like into my friends' circles. When we talk about inclusion, we talk about power sharing, we talk about decision-making sharing, and we talk about creating an environment that welcomes those different perspectives. Because if I invite someone into my world that is a white supremacist culture-driven world, right? And I say, oh, come, you're different, come, thrive. I didn't even make a bed for you, right? Like, I invited you to my house, like, hey, come live with me. I didn't make a bed for you. I didn't get an extra plate for you, right? You're just like, come and live within my system. So that's oppression, right? Because you're like, oh, now we're diverse. Now we have these people in our, in my circle, in my organization. And then, but I haven't really created culture shifts, organization culture shifts that authentically accommodate other people's way of being. Mm-hmm. And so that's when we talk about inclusion, right? So diversity is one thing, but it needs to go hand in hand with inclusion, which is that culture shift, right? To actually invite people. There's an example that say diversity is being invited to the dance, and inclusion is actually being invited to dance. Right. So, like, it's not enough to say, hey, you can come. Like, actually, you can be
become my dance partner.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's inclusion. Then we talk about equity. So equity has two meanings, right? In business, we know equity as ownership or interest in a company, right? That is legit, and that is very important, because ownership is often an area where the oppressed are deprived. Right? Like, you don't get to own, because ownership is concentrated in the power structure. So that's one meaning of equity, but also in the anti-oppression, anti-racism conversation, when we talk about equity, we talk about fairness for everybody to have same access to the same outcomes. Right? So we want to make sure that everybody has the same opportunities to get to the same outcome. That is not equality, right? Because we are not, like, if I have $5 in my bank account, and Tavian, my husband, who grew up in a poor neighborhood, Black poor neighborhood in Brooklyn, has -10, and all of us are given $50. I have 55, but Tavian has only 40, right? Because he was at a minus to begin with. So it's not, equity is not equality. It's actually looking at at circumstances and then mitigating them so all would have the same access to outcomes. So Tavian would need to be given $60, right? Or 65 to be where I am, right? So that's how we talk about equity and understand equity. And it's very important that it is not equality. And some of you maybe have seen, and there's an illustration where there's a game happening and there's a fence, and then there's three people, a tall person, a child, and a person in a wheelchair. And so the tall person can see the game, but there's a fence, and then the kid maybe can peek a little, right? And then the person in a wheelchair can't see anything. And so equity in that example is the person on a wheel with a wheelchair is getting a ramp. The child has a box to stand up, and now everybody can see. But do we need the fence? Let's take the fence off. If we take the fence off, the root, if we eliminate the root, right? Everybody can see, the tall person, the kid, the person in a wheelchair. No need for no accommodations, right? And so now it brings me to accessibility. When we talk about accessibility, it is not to be confused with accommodations, right? Accessibility is when you design something that's accessible, you design for the most people to be able to experience it the way it was intended, right? So if you added a platform, like it's a patch, right? You fixed it for that event, but it's not fixed overall. And when you took the fence off, everybody was able to experience the game, to look at the game the way it was intended, right? So when we talk about accessibility, in diversity, equity, inclusion, really, we don't talk about accommodations, right? And so that goes across the spectrum. For, we always think about physical accessibility, but we talk about digital. We talk about cognitive. Like, we just need to be more mindful and account for different ways of being, rather than thinking that our way of being is the shit. I apologize. I have foul mouth. That our way is the only way. Okay. So yes, I think I wanted to cover these. This is basically what I simmer in every day. I think about it, and it's evolving. It evolves every single time, and we work with a lot of institutions where you come in and you have to uncover all these layers. All these layers of oppression. Like, how does an organization hire? Like, how do we mitigate unconscious bias, right? Like, we all have unconscious biases, right? These are like this hidden, we're not aware, right? It's in our, like, we're not cognizant about these biases that pop up at any given time. Like, I just had facilitated a meeting a couple of weeks ago where my biases popped up in the meeting, and after I had to mitigate it, right? And thankfully we have tools where we create the space where people can express if they feel kind of like ouches or oopses, right? But I was like, I was talking to I think it was a male, and I think I had some kind of like bias that was like, oh, what you talking about? That completely disagrees with what I hold as a woman, right? And it wasn't even like like, it was just my bias came up where I was like, oh, what did you just say, right? And then I realized that it really like I should have been more reflective. Like, why am I being triggered? Like, why is my body saying something? So, none of us are exempt, and it's just a learning journey of like checking ourselves. And unconscious bias is not something that we can completely erase, right? It happens. Like, this is a shortcut that our brain takes, right? I mean, I literally have been myself in places where it's like, oh, let me clutch my bag closer to me. And it's so real. I live in Klaipeda in Žvejybos Uostas, and we have a Roma community nearby, right? Roma is not that we used to call them, right? Like, we used to call them a different way, which I think is a more oppressive way, those communities. But like, again, there are all kinds of stereotypes, and not because they've been given ways to thrive. No, they've been freaking oppressed, right? Like, they haven't been given the same access to opportunities as me living three buildings down the road. And so, right. And like, I clutched my bag, I clutched my wallet, right? Like, when I was younger, and I wasn't even thinking about it. Now, like, I have the ability to slow down and think, Like very simple example of
Just as you
bias.
say, when you recognize the symptoms, you start seeing them in the situations that felt so normal and like, innate kind of.
Exactly. So true. So true. And the whole symptoms and root is something that comes from LCC, to tell you the truth. Like that is the critical thinking that I'm thinking about, being able to question and differentiate, like, what is that, right? Like, what is that? Is that systemic? Is that individual? Right? Is it, yeah, right. So, okay. That's
Well,
it.
and now that you've mentioned the critical thinking, like I want to bring the question that from Rokas, who just says, well, you mentioned that critical thinking is incredibly important to learn more. So if a person is more go with the flow, is it harder to develop further? So like the role for the critical thinking, and I mean, and that came through in many of the things you've said, but just to kind of give the answer to Rokas.
Well, Rocky, thank you. I don't know if they are mutually exclusive, and I don't know if are we thinking about the characteristic of white supremacy that I did bring in is like it's one or another. I could absolutely see it. So if you go with the flow, happy-go-lucky, like, listen, I could be living in United States right now, happy-go-lucky, not even having to worry about any kind of racist system, right? The layers of the systemic oppression that exists in this country. I have the privilege. I could freaking like go get my $8 coffees, and like live happily ever after. I could, right? But I could also live my life and still question. Like, I don't think it's exclusive. You still question. I do think though that it is an intention that you have to hold, right? Like I could choose to be completely ignorant and have a happy life and live my life. I can choose to live my life, but also weave critical thinking into it, which is going to make my life, I'm like mindful of language. I'm mindful of language. It's just going to make my life more rich, because I am understanding and inviting and wanting to understand other people's ways of being instead of saying my way and that's it.
Well, I think in all of your passionate responses and your thoughts, I mean, the critical thinking is at the core of this all. It's like, do you truly go with the flow and not think about your actions, not think about the neighbor living or standing beside you, or do you actually weigh your own behavior, the behavior of the society? So the critical thinking is being able to kind of look at your own conscience and also think about the actions and evaluate and then choose how you go about it. So like the critical thinking truly becomes kind of at the core of it all.
Yes. And I love that you say I said choose, because it is a decision, right? You have to make a decision to make decisions in your life that are more mindful towards other people. And that requires a lot of questioning, right? And critical thinking. We at Yancey Consulting say rigor and love. Like, we always want to make sure that we question everything. We interrogate everything. Why? Who said that? Who said that? When they said it? What was the circumstances? Right? And then not forgetting love for ourselves, love for each other, love for our neighbors, our fellow beings, because we also have to love ourselves, knowing that we are work in process. Like and when I say we, I want to actually, I should probably change it to I and speak for myself rather than the collective. But when I do say we, I mean white people, right? And it has been a journey for me as a Lithuanian to be in United States, be white, but also be an immigrant. So there is also intersectionality of identities that we talk about, right? Sure. And but yeah, so be this white person, but also not be part of United States history, right? So how do I hold my responsibility to the world as a white person I'm not a descendant of these people, right? My great-great-grandparents didn't own slaves, right? But yet I understand that I'm white and that I do have privileges just because I was born white. And doesn't matter that I was born in Lithuania and have nothing to do with the United States at that time. Like, I am still part of the perpetuation of the system, right? Like, I mean, numerous countries have been colonized throughout history. Like, that legacy exists. Yes.
I want to bring another question. And the question is there any chance to hear your response about intercultural communication? And did you study that at LCC? Because intercultural communication kind of seems to fall into this. And as you know, that's also a class at LCC. And so the question is, did you study it? And then also, what do you see as a role for intercultural communication in this whole conversation?
Thank you. So I did take, okay, so this was a very long time ago. I graduated in 2006. I did take communication classes. I'm sure that one of them was probably something along those lines, but to the point that it changes, like the understanding changes, right? The communication changes, the thinking changes. Like, for example, so if you notice, I've been using Black people instead of African Americans, and this is the people that are in my circle, social circles, self-identify as Black, not as African American. So I am very conscious how people how people refer to themselves, and I want to honor that. And so, to the point that communication changes, right? Like, terms change. I recently actually started building a kind of like a guidepost for anti-oppressive communication. So when you say intercultural, to me, it just says anti-oppressive communication, right? Because to me, it says, like, I see your culture, I value your culture, I want to make space for your culture. That actually reminds me, when we talk about inclusion, fundamentally, if we really question, inclusion means to include someone into something that already exists, right? Fundamentally, that's flawed when you think about it, because if I'm here and I want to include you, I'm including you to mine, whatever mine is, right? So maybe we actually, it's not about like including you into something, but creating something new that's pluralistic, right? And so when I think about communications, going back to the question, I think about anti-oppression, right? I think about seeing different people's perspectives, inviting different people's perspectives, and also communicating in ways that do not uplift as white supremacy cultures and values being the only way, right? So no, I don't recall that I took a class specifically that, but with my thinking now and my experience, I think about it this way. So for example, in that guide that I was putting together for an organization, they were like, oh, okay, so we need to make sure that our communication is anti-oppressive. Like, can we get like a guide, right? Like what? Mm-hmm. So, and it, it's, but the things is like, okay, so first of all, who is writing, right? Like, who is talking, who is writing, who is sharing the message, right? Who made the decisions, what's being said? Is it just white perspectives? Is it white male perspectives? Because often leadership makes decisions, right? It's power hoarding. Power usually is not distributed often. And so, and usually leadership positions are, white men often. And right, so who's calling, right? Who's writing the message? Who is being uplifted in the communication message? Whose voices are included in the editorial process to see that there are no language and words that can have negative consequences, right? So for example, what was the word? Let's say artistic excellence, right? So artistic excellence. This is actually a real life example that the organization is thinking through. So when we say excellence, what do we mean? And I mean, I'm not like, I actually, if you want to journal or just reflect, when we say excellence, what do we mean? Do we mean perfectionism? Do we mean written? Do we mean like it's this or that? Like, just really questioning our understanding and where it comes from, where it stems from, to make sure that we're not perpetuating the same kind of white supremacy cultures. Mm-hmm. So when I think about intercultural communication, I think about that. And so the ways to think about it is like, how do we include different perspectives in a meaningful way? Not only like, oh, hey, like I was mindful of this, but really, if we need to ask how a person describes themselves, let's ask, right? Like, let's say we're talking with indigenous communities, right? Let's ask. how they want to describe themselves, how they call themselves. We ask pronouns. Like you can see in my chat here, I put my pronoun she, her, right? But like people do fall across the spectrum of gender, right? People and people self-identify as they often, right? So mindful of the people want to be referred to. So all these things come like that I spoke about, like for me plays into communication, because it is communication between people. Intercultural communication is still communication with people, and it's about that lens of and values of anti-oppression.
Well, yes, I'm sure you will be approached as a guest speaker in one of the intercultural communication classes at LCC soon enough, because I mean, that's your passion and your experience definitely speaks to this. But to bring that, you know, into the context here in Lithuania, I want to read the next question. Here it goes. So, hi, I'm Victoria from Nigeria, West Africa, seeking to get a bachelor's degree at LCC. Now I'm Black, and one big worry I had on the back of my mind is being discriminated against as a result of my race prior to putting in my application. I got discouraged from that because a lot of friends that reside in Ukraine and Russia, and they claim lots of countries, especially in Eastern Europe, do not actually do much of Black integration. My question is, I'm aware that I can't fully avoid racial discrimination in any white system I find myself. However, what coping mechanisms do I put in place to remain psychologically healthy while living in not just Klaipeda, but in any system that I find myself? So here is the question, and I guess then it's like, yes, putting that in perspective, and also, you know, what should the context here learn from you, and what are the things that would be advisable to do from your side?
Thank you, Victoria, for that question. Thank you. I don't feel like I could speak to coping mechanisms like on a personal level, because they are very individual. But I do want to bring in the notion back in of psychological safety, right? And that I believe from my experience, LCC does a great job of creating this safe space. An example that recently happened in my practice is a chat, a Zoom call was bombed, what it's called, right? And so it was an IP that bounced and it couldn't be tracked, and someone came in and called a Black person the N-word, right? So this happened, like shocking, right? Shocking. I mean, just really incomprehensible for the person that it was addressed to. The learning from that is that the organization came together, and during their next public call, I believe, said, we will not stand for that. An attack on one is an attack on all of us, right? And so I shared this as an example as like creating safe spaces and honoring as a community, right? So I think about LCC as a community. I know community is very important to LCC. So I cannot speak to like specific mechanisms. And I also, Victoria, know that your experience is your own, and I will not know your experience, right? I can empathize your experience, but this is the book that I love for myself, and it's called My Grandmother's Hands, and it's written by Resma Menaken, and it gives a lot of actually practical tools of just how to deal with your like this not discomfort, but this like your body being out of balance, right? When you have visceral reactions to external environments. So this is the book that has different tools that I would recommend. Now, in terms of like application, like you said, and in Lithuania, I know that race, at least when I lived in Lithuania, it was not a topic that we would ever encounter because we are a very homogeneous society. And I think LCC is a rich soil for those conversations because it's so international. I think it is good to ask wherever, right, at your job or application at a university, what are your anti-biasing policies, right? Or what is your how do you eliminate biases in your application? Like it is, I think that it is a very reasonable question to ask. right? Like knowing the reality. So are there policies at institutional policies, right? We talk about systems because it's systems. There might be one or two real racist people, right, who actually like explicitly are racist, but fundamentally people don't think they're racist, nor do they want to be racist, but there are systems that perpetuate certain behavior. So I would interrogate the systems and ask questions. Yeah, Victoria. So it's a really, really great question. I thank you for asking, and I can't say that I know it all, but from my understanding now, that's what I would share.
And I would truly also kind of from my own side echo what Jolita said. I mean, whenever you have that question and that fear, do not hold it inside, but do verbalize it. Ask and see what universities will respond, so that you know where you that you will feel comfortable wherever you go to. So that is also the goal of our webinars in one way, to give you the insights of careers our alumni are engaged in, but through that, they are also sharing their own experience, which hopefully gives you a peek into what LCC International University is and can be about for you. And relating to Jolita, to your career and your work, I mean, there is a question from our current student. So Evianda asks, well, you mentioned that media justice is one of the fields you work with in your organization. Can you please elaborate more on that? And how does that look like? So I guess maybe it's a student who is also interested in the field. So kind of sharing your practical experience will mean a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you, Avianda, for the question and for listening, that you caught that we do work in media justice sectors as well. So when we think about media justice, when we think about justice in general, when I think about justice in general, I think about really really equity, right? I think about equity and the ability for all to thrive and have access to the same opportunities. So when we talk about media, there's a whole spectrum, but I'll bring in some examples to more contextualize it. For example, algorithmic justice. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, right, that's one field actually that's getting a lot of attention, and because there's such disparate, well, the representation in the coding world, right, is primarily white men. There's a couple of women, right, it's changing now. But the point is that white men are doing the coding for artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is a system that needs to be fed databases to learn from, right? So apparently, and it's actually Joy Bulamini, she's a scholar in that field and has done a lot of work in algorithmic justice. The databases that are fed to artificial intelligence are, guess what? White, right? Our tests have shown with different artificial intelligence systems, including one by Amazon that want to sell, I think they already said they won't do it, to police, right? They want to sell their artificial intelligence systems to police for facial recognition. Don't recognize Michelle Obama. Don't recognize or recognize her as a man, right? So there's different, so there's biases that are embedded in coding. So that's for example one area of media justice that we work in, right, to make sure that we eliminate again the systemic issues, right? The systemic, it's not about this one or another, right? It's about the systems. Okay, then fundamentally, why are only white men coders, right? Because again, I mean, my husband is like, when he hears that, he's going to be like, you should stop probably pulling me as an example. But up until 8th grade, no one in his school told him or his class about college. No one told that this was even an possibility, right? Like, so obviously this black man is not a coder, right? Like no one even was like, there was not infrastructure even to steward that. Whereas, other white five-year-olds are already in coding classes. They're private, that you can afford because you have a different kind of job, because systems allowed you to get that kind of job. They not pigeonholed you to your existing status of socioeconomic status quo. so anyway, so one example, artificial, but really digital divide that we speak about, which is so important now during COVID, right? Even I assume in Lithuania, who has access to technology? Who has access to internet? Is internet fast, right? If I have slow internet, and I can't get a job. I can't even make my health appointment, right, during COVID. So the digital divide, right? And why that the digital divide exists? What are the roots there? So let's address those systems. So when we talk about media justice, we really talk about addressing oppression in the media sector.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure, I mean, also seeing from the comments on live Facebook that your thoughts gave lots of provoking questions to our own students, hopefully also to our prospective students, that kind of, I think the beauty is to see your passion in this and how your personal life, I mean, gives you also the grounds and the experience to have the authenticity to talk about certain things. But I think also as our own students are considering their careers, it's also deciding, whether you just choose a job as such, or do you actually choose a job that also aligns with your passion? Because I think maybe there is a kind of last comment from your side on this. When is it just a job for the sake of having a job, and when you choose to do something that you also personally believe in and you're passionate about?
And thank you, and thank you, Avianda, for your thank you. I hope I answered the questions. And I do want to say that I do hold myself as work in progress, right? Yes, I do work in this field, but I am not an expert. Like I not an expert, right? I am on my learning journey, and I do my best to educate myself and to question and to grow. So I do want to uplift that again. But what was the question I said?
Just a career where you're also feeling
yes,
passionate.
I remember. Thank you. So I have to acknowledge that the ability to hold a job that aligns your purpose or ignites your purpose or aligns with your values is also a privilege. It is also a privilege. I hold that. I understand that. When you're able, or when you do reach that space where you're able to choose, right, to do something, it's tough. Listen, I sometimes would prefer to have a job where I can close the door at 5, or my sister lives in Denmark, or at 4, and be done with it, right? Because this is it's work, and it's hard, and you need to minimize your ego, or to really check your ego as a white person, and open up the space to interrogate everything. And sometimes it hurts. Listen, I'm a crier. I cry a lot, right? Like, and it's not a good response either. Like crying is the epiphany of white fragility. Like, oh, this is so sad, right? Like, no, not the. We did this. Let's address it. So, choosing a job, is a privilege. To be able to choose a job is a privilege. And when you find someone that inspires you and brings meaningful impacts, meaningful to you, right? Meaningful to me, like it is subjective. To me, impacts to the world, like, yes, let's have more of that. Right. And so I am grateful every day that I have this job, that I'm challenged, and there are days when I'm like, I just, it's too much. Right. But, and I'll finish on that. When we turn to a person that does not have or hasn't been given the same access to opportunities, and they live it every single day, they live oppression every single day. My discomfort is BS. I need to live it. I need to live it. I need to live it. So the world could be better for the 7 generations in the future.
Thank you. I think, from LCC's perspective, it truly, lights my heart to see the passion of our alumni. And this is truly the purpose of the webinars, to be sharing the pride that we as an institution have in our alumni, wherever they are and whatever they do. I mean, truly, like every task, every job matters. And when there is so much passion as what you've shared today, I want to really thank you for your insights, and I really hope that they were inspiring to our students, to our future students. So I know that by telling about the career and the combination of passion, that was a very wise advice to our students. But I just would want to ask for your last words of wisdom to those high school students who or young people who are looking at LCC as a possibility for the future education. What would you tell them, and or maybe how would you define LCC for those who are not sure what to choose? Based from your own experience, and now being, of course, away from LCC for a while, like as you said, your education was quite a long time ago, but still, like what would you say?
For me, LCC was the best thing that happened. Truly. I know that I wouldn't be where I am now without LCC. I know that. It is a place of community. It is a place of inclusivity. It is a place of growth, safe growth, and critical thinking. This word just, I can't escape this phrase today, but it is true. I really love that in one of the comments on Facebook in the alumni group, there was a situation where the comment was posted. Basically, LCC defined success in a very narrow way, right? And so it was this, and then there were a couple of people, and I was among one of them, who's like, great, that Harvard could be success, right? But do you then not consider LCC a success, right? Like that's basically how I think about it, right? There's a spectrum, and what my point is that it is about the quality that you receive. And I think that the quality that you receive at LCC is is the success that I envision. Like it is the epiphany of what your informative years of relationship building and intellect building are. So, I mean, I'm going to be one-sided. I'm like, if you're thinking about LCC, do it, right? Like, do it really, because it is a place that offers a different kind of education in Lithuania and in surrounding countries. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just so subjective. I love LCC. Like, listen, I said, like, I graduated in 2006. Like, I know you from back, from knowing back then. I have these very strong relationships. I met people here that I met at LCC, Americans that were visiting and studying at LCC, and we'll still continue our relationships. And it is tremendously meaningful. It's meaningful.
Right. As we kept saying, it is all about the community, and it's not just the community while you study, it's then everlasting LCC community. Once you are in LCC, at LCC, we say you're forever part of LCC. And then, we all shape LCC stories. We all shape LCC success, LCC alumni success stories. And we all grow and learn and develop together. And those were the same things I said at the very beginning. So it's kind of very symbolic in how we are rounding up today.